Now we move into Unit 4, which is still in predictive analytics, but now we're going to move into time series analysis and forecasting. And we'll use some of the concepts that we learned in Unit 3, linear regression, to do some of the time series forecasting along with other methods. So, what is forecasting? It's simply trying to predict the future. We're going to focus on time series analysis. So what that means is we will have or collect a set of evenly spaced throughout time observations. So if we're trying to predict sales, we would gather sales data at the same point in time repeatedly, and then use that to try to help us forecast what future sales would look like. So it could be quarterly sales, it could be daily sales, it could even be hourly sales if we had high volume types of things going on that we're trying to sell. So then we want to use that time series to predict what will happen into the future. So the basic idea is to base the forecast of a variable on its own history. So we would use our past historical sales to forecast future sales. What this does is it helps us to avoid the need to specify any kind of causal relationship, and also to predict values of explanatory variables. So if we added in other explanatory variables besides the time series itself, the past history, we would have to make sure that that value is available for when we're trying to forecast it. If not, we would have to somehow maybe predict those and use those into future forecasts. And then what we want to do is, once we get a nice method down, we'd like to make routine calculations and apply it to a large number of cases, and then hopefully automate it, putting it into some kind of software like decision support systems. And we don't also want to rely too much on qualitative information, so that the forecast can be easily automated. So if we have quantitative information, we can easily, most of the time, automate the forecast. Obviously, if we automate it, we'd want to also check it and make sure that it stays in tune, it stays doing what we think it's going to do. So the first thing we should do before we start any kind of project, but especially a forecasting project, is actually define the goal. So first we should ask ourselves, why are we actually generating this forecast? What will it be used for? Is it going to be used for planning purposes? Is it going to be used for budgeting purposes, which I caution against? Is it going to be used for personnel decisions, for expansion kind of decisions that are going to be made? And then based on what it's going to be used for, that can also help us determine how accurate it needs to be. So is a 5% error rate okay? Is a 20% error rate okay? And then also, not only accuracy, but how precise does it need to be? So remember, accuracy and precision are two different things. Precise means that you can do it over and over again and hit the same dot or target. Accuracy means that I'm actually hitting where I want to hit on the target. So the other thing that we need to also be careful of is, what does it actually cost me if the forecast is wrong? So if I'm forecasting something that's going to be used in my budgeting process and I over forecast, meaning I forecast more revenue than what's coming in, then I have a problem. If I under forecast, it's a problem, but it's not nearly as bad a problem, right? So under forecasting, in that case, conservatively forecasting, would be a better thing to do in a lot of cases, so that I have, at the end of the year, more money left over that I can spend on other things. If I over forecast, I run out of money. I might have to fire people or shut down, things like that. In addition to just kind of in general defining the goal, we can really break goals down into two broad areas. One is descriptive and one is predictive. So descriptive simply wants to describe what happened in the past. Hopefully we also understand why something happened in the past. So they were kind of like, oh, let's just see what happened, right? Predictive goals, though, are much more interested in how good the forecast is. So there we're interested in accuracy. And so because they have different intentions, descriptive versus predictive, we might do different types of modeling in order to understand or reach those goals, whether it's descriptive or predictive. Another important decision and consideration is the time horizon. So what we should do is consider how far into the future that we want to forecast. And then also how much historical data do I have. And then as we move farther out into the future and we're trying to forecast farther out, what do you think happens? Well, take a second and think about it. Hopefully you said, well, the further out I forecast, the more likely I will not be as confident about the accuracy of the forecast. So take, for example, if I asked you to forecast the price of a gallon of gasoline for tomorrow, you would probably guess either what you saw today when you drove past the gas station, or plus or minus a couple cents, and either, right? However, if I say, what do you predict the gas price for a gallon to be in 3 weeks from now? Well, that gets more unknown. So the farther out you go, there's more unknowns that we may not be able to take into account. Then we also need to consider data. Where does the data that we're using come from? Did it come from one of our systems? So our ERP system, Enterprise Resource Planning System. Did it come from our accounting system? Did it come from our Salesforce system? How good is that data? All right. And then what's the proper temporal frequency? That means what is the time units that we're measuring stuff in? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Quarterly? That kind of stuff. So the more frequent the data is, daily, we can always aggregate that up to a weekly or a monthly or a quarterly. Going the other direction from much more longer time intervals, quarterly, and breaking it down into weekly data or monthly data might be more difficult. And then how granular should the data be? How into the details are we going to get? And then how do we deal with messy data? So more than likely the data you get will not be perfectly tidy and all that fun stuff. The stuff I give you will be primarily tidy and in a nice format, but may not at times. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with missing values? Things of that nature. So those are some of the data considerations we need to keep in mind as we start this forecasting process.